Hi, One Earth Live. This is Michael Shaun Conaway with Boldly Now. I have the great honor and pleasure of introducing you to my friend, Suzanne Frindt. Suzanne is a global leader in developing leadership. She spent most of her career doing that, and she's an expert in the emerging field of community-led development. Suzanne has just stepped down as the CEO of the Hunger Project and has a lot of experience in understanding how to bring leadership and expertise to communities where they can use those as resources to develop themselves. Suzanne, welcome to Boldly Now.
Thank you, Michael Shaun.
Suzanne, we're in this pandemic moment right now, and it's still pretty new. We're a couple of months into it, and although there's kind of an emerging sense of we're out of the kind of first chaotic stage, we're now into a new stage, but it's still very disruptive. And people have been touched in their lives, and there's suffering going on in many different areas of the planet. We've got economic systems that are, if not failing, they're stretched to their failing points. Healthcare responses that are vastly inadequate to the challenges at hand. And amongst all this kind of chaos and kind of transitionary experience that we're going through, there's also some moments of beauty and kind of new things coming through that are touching our heart in positive ways. Just where are you today? What's happening for you? What's in your world? Just update us. Where is it? What is it like where you are, and what's going on for you personally?
Well, personally, I live in Kirkland, Washington, in the state of Washington in the U.S., and that is the place where about a mile from here, the very first case of COVID was diagnosed in the U.S. So it felt very surreal and very early on in the whole process. So I feel in some ways that this local experience that I'm having that's part of the global experience is, was way early in the process. And we're fine, we're safe. Just really in my role as also as a global board member of the Hunger Project, I'm just present too on our calls, just the horrific fallout and consequences, not just of the disease itself, but on livelihoods and people having to leave their place of work where they live. Millions of garment workers in Bangladesh and having to walk 100 kilometers home. Many people starving along the way, only to be rejected by people in their villages, thinking they're bringing the COVID to them. So there's just so much human trauma and drama that comparatively, my life here in Kirkland, Washington, it feels like a world away from that. And yet I know we're all connected.
Yeah. And I think like when we experience fragility in the United States or Europe or one of the highly developed countries, it's a very personal experience for us, and it's difficult, but I think most people have it's really challenging for them to begin to imagine what this might be like for the bottom 2 billion people on the planet. And then how do we even begin, like we can't even sort our own lives out or our own communities out, how we even begin to think about them I think it's challenging for most people.
It is, the leaders I've been interacting with here in the U.S. and back now in my role at leadership development education, it's I have to keep bringing myself present to be present with their upset. Right. That they can't get to the grocery store, they've got their children home and being homeschooled and the chaos that brings, or a couple are both working from home and sort of all over each other in that context, and yet that does cause a dissonance, disconnection in many ways. And then the contrast of this global role I have in the Hunger Project of also understanding what that means, as you said, for people in rural villages who already were on the very tentative edge of life and livelihoods. So that, the contrast, to not discount the experience that each and every person is having globally, that it touches each of us and in a very disconnecting and displacing way.
Yeah, and one thing that just struck me recently, I just heard about, farmers destroying livestock and crops and stuff. And, I think this has been common knowledge since the 1970s that there are people on the planet who are in food poverty. And then there's food waste of, incredibly baffling proportions. But again, in COVID time, and getting the system that's built up, the reason that they're having to get rid of these food is because major distributors to like fast food restaurants and stuff can't take the produce in and they have no other distribution channels, you really quickly get a picture of what building for efficiency versus effectiveness is like. We have a very highly efficient system for doing one thing, but if you break that thing, then the system is really not really good for much of anything. And I think I know that's confronting me. That's got to be kind of confronting for you and people who are working in development around hunger, especially.
It is. And, Michael, Shaun, the Hunger Project works in about 14,000 rural villages around the world. So mostly with the rural poor and those in poverty. And the impact of COVID was very, very sudden in most of those countries, the shutdowns, that, really just having people get accurate information that shutdown doesn't mean that farmers shouldn't plant seeds or that harvesting shouldn't be done. Most of those people are subsistence, small scale farmers. So, the challenge in having them get accurate and good information from reliable sources, WHO or the CDC of their country, is crucial. Otherwise, as we've seen everywhere, people get crazy information, including taking drugs that could actually, or practices that could actually be very detrimental. So I think that's something we share too around the world, is the need for that.
For good information, good sense making, we call it. And here we are, we're inundated with bad sense making in Western worlds. How do you get good sense to people? And that's a totally different conversation. But I do want to talk about one of the, I mentioned, this gap in the supply chain and whatnot. And I know that's not what the Hunger Project does. The Hunger Project doesn't supply food aid as a means to end hunger. Tell us a little bit about what the Hunger Project's approach to ending hunger is.
Sure, and Michael, Shaun, in ways it does actually connect to that sense-making conversation, because the work of the Hunger Project has always been, over the last 42 years, is about uplifting and developing community-based leadership. So that means we currently have trained 500,000 of the rural level, 2/3 of those women, who are now in their communities. You and I had a conversation the other day where I heard you use the term hyperlocal. And, we talk about localization of the work. Hyperlocal is really a great description of the work of the Hunger Project. Because in these times, it's actually through the leadership of those folks and mobilizing their communities, mobilizing volunteers, that roughly 16.5 million people can be reached. So the work of the Hunger Project has been in this, what we call community-led development methodology, which means starting with women as key change agents, mobilizing the communities for self-reliant action, and forging great relationships with local governance, where often there are the resources people need. So this methodology over the last 42 years has actually positioned the Hunger Project and other organizations who use this community-led approach to be able to have, make a commitment to COVID resilient communities, because it's those community leaders themselves. It's not the expats sitting in some, large city, or even national staff sitting in some large city. It's actually those leaders who've been trained for communication, for leadership, for collaboration, for accessing resources. Those folks are the real heroes and heroines, bringing about the safety and well-being of the communities. So that's been the Hunger Project's approach over the last 42 years. And I'm just thrilled that during this, thrilled is a strange word to use, but I'm really proud, and it's great to see that this community-led approach is actually what's making the difference in this time of COVID-19.
Yeah, and it's I've been familiar with the Hunger Project for most of my adult life, because as you said, it's would you say 42 years now? 42
years. Yeah.
So
I'm 43. Yeah.
I was a young one when it came out, but I've been aware of it like an idea, right? And this idea of going into communities and developing people so that they can have their own capacity to end hunger in their communities always stuck with me. It's like, oh, that's so smart. That's so much better. And of course we have the, biblical reference of teaching people to fish, instead of giving them a fish. And so it seems sensible and smart, but right now, right in this moment, the kind of conversation around world and global governance is starting to take on this notion that there will never be a centralized authority that can understand local economies, local resources, local customs and traditions well enough to not end up oppressing people. Any one-size-fits-all solution leaves a certain percentage of people out. And I think in the past, historically, as we were trying to lift ourselves up into the industrial age, it was okay. And I think right now it's getting to the point where like, oh, wow, maybe like designing a system that has poverty and starving people in the system as a fact of the system is no longer tolerable. And we don't have enough people in a centralized location to ever figure it out for everywhere. So we actually better teach everywhere or all the locations to do that for themselves. And then organically, like an ecosystem, you end up with feedback loops and you end up with information-rich environment where localized sense-making can happen and then hyper-local decision-making can happen. And then you get like, now the Hunger Project is like, not like a really cool idea. It's actually an essential ingredient into governing the world. Is if you don't have those skills at that hyper-local level, then you can't have good sense-making. And if you can't have good sense-making, you can't have good choice-making. I also just want to, applaud like the leading through women and the women in the villages, understanding that, like the power of that. So in a way, I really feel, like the Hunger Project was time traveling when they were started. They traveled to now and started to figure out what was going to be needed now. And for 40 years, I've been working on figuring that out. And we are so lucky to have the insights of the Hunger Project for our time, where we really begin to tackle like what is global governance going to look like, and what is hyper-local governance and leadership and working together going to look like. So I'm going to thank all of the Hunger Project and everybody that's gone before you, through you. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you for everything you said, Michael, Shaun. When you said actually standing in this moment and creating what needed to happen, that's exactly the technology, the human-centered technology of the Hunger Project. Our vision, commitment, and action workshop actually has all of us, but also people in communities stand in the future, where their village is free from hunger, where boys and girls go to school equally, where clean water and sanitation is available to all. It's way beyond ending hunger. Right? It's like, what is this beautiful, abundant, collaborative sort of village that they create for themselves? And then once that vision is created, there are people who just light up and get excited about that vision and that future. Those people we call catalysts or animators, and they're usually the ones that say, what do we do? What do we take on? How do we make this happen? And through that, there's usually a small group of people who take on a project or two to build their muscles in collaboration and to actually take on something that previously they might have just waited for the government or waited for some nonprofit to come do for them. And through that, and through the leadership of the women in the village, because their voices have to come together with men to be able to have that kind of collaboration, that new sense of the capacity of humans is expanded. So yes, it is fully standing in the future, standing in the vision of how we want the world to be. The Hunger Project's vision statement, which has been for me also taken on as my personal vision statement also, is a world where every woman, man, and child leads a healthy and fulfilling life of self-reliance and dignity. It's way beyond ending hunger, Michael, Shaun.
Yeah, great. And I think, I want, every time I hear that, I think, wow, I wish that for every human being. It doesn't matter what the level of apparent wealth or poverty is. And so thank you for that. And again, thanks for the Hunger Project. Just tell us really quickly, and I'll get this up on the screen in the interview. If somebody wanted to donate to the Hunger Project and support their programs, where would they reach out to? Who would they contact?
Sure. Well, the website is www.thp.org, and you can do /Life Earth.
Great. So thp.org gets you there, /Live Earth. Great. I want to make sure that people do understand that the money that they donate actually goes to these educational programs in the developing countries that you guys support. You can find a lot of information about the Hunger Project. It's an amazing story. If you want to actually hear a story, a bold idea and a bold promise got carried forward into the world. It's an amazing case study. If you're interested in building your own bold project, you should definitely look at the Hunger Project and the way they've done that. I'll come back to the other part of what Hunger Project does in kind of its the way it addresses governments and governance at the the countrywide level. But before I do that, I actually want to talk about now, you've been working on taking the learnings of the Hunger Project into this larger conversation called community-led development, which is, if I understand this correctly, is to take the learnings of the Hunger Project outside of the Hunger Project and make it available to anybody that wants to do community development in this way. Is that right? That sounds really interesting.
Yeah, it's pretty close, Michael, Shaun. Well, the Hunger Projects, all the methodology of the Hunger Project is already open source. Mm-hmm. And what I'm really fired up about is taking the essence of that vision, commitment, and action workshop and having that be in its most generic and powerful form for any nonprofit to be able to take on. And also what I've learned over, particularly during the time of being the global CEO of the Hunger Project, is many other organizations have also developed some methodologies that help unleash the human spirit and really accomplish that essential mindset shift change from I can't to I can to we can. So, my commitment is really to also honor all of those and to be able to bring the best of those in combination with the Hunger Project's work and make it available open source to all the nonprofits in the world. I think that having that as a resource, along with all the other resources for the movement that the movement for community-led development has, will just be one more thing to help really scale that leadership globally.
Yeah, really important point you made there, and I want to make sure that our audience really pays attention here. Especially like we think about in COVID right now, what if somebody comes up with a vaccine? Will only rich people be able to get it? Yeah. Or will the global community come together and say, no, that's needed for the whole world. If we don't take care of the whole world, then we still have the problem. And I think most people are starting to go, oh, wow, everybody should have access to the vaccine. And I want to say that one of the things you're pointing to here is what we at Boldly Now we say is like one of the underpinning fundamentals of a thriving humanity is that the equal access to this intellectual property, these things that we've learned to do, and then some organizations hold them tightly and protect them in some way. And I'm not saying we should do away with capitalism and ownership and things like that. That's another debate for another time. But the fact that there are organizations who have bravely made things open source is one thing, but I think what you're doing is a step further. You're not only saying, hey, there's some open sources things, you can just come get them. You're actually actively trying to engage others in the process of taking up these processes and information. So it's almost like you're out there actively giving away intellectual property, not just making it open. You're being the Johnny Appleseed of ways to get development to happen. And I applaud that. And I'm just also like, what does that feel like and how's it working is the other part of that.
Well, that certainly is the intention. You talked about open access. One of the catchphrases I had during my time as CEO at the Hunger Project was causing collaboration at scale. I just, dun, 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 I just love, this idea of having really causing, collaboration doesn't necessarily only happen on its own. Right? Like in the rural communities, it's those leaders, those people who lit up during the Vision, Commitment, and Action workshop who actually take on mobilizing their community. They're the agents for change, right? So it does take an agent for change to cause collaboration. So to cause collaboration at scale in this community-led approach, these materials and resources have to be available. So how it's going, we were invited to, several of us were invited to Haiti recently through the generosity and request of an organization called Haiti Outreach to really bring the Vision, Commitment, and Action workshop there and sort of try it out in a more generic form to adapt it into Haiti Outreach's methodology. And I'd say that went really, really well. And we learned a lot about how to be responsible for pulling out the context appropriate pieces. Right, there's pieces of the shifting mindsets and the training and development for leadership that are the distinctions that need to, the things that need to be in there. And then there's always this context appropriate piece about what is the historical, what's the story, the history of people in this particular region. What's their terminology? What's their relationship to development? What's their relationship to training? What's their relationship to leadership? What's our relationship to government? That has to be considered. So we're in I would say, stage one of that development and intending to have something more broadly available here very soon.
That's really exciting.
Process. Yeah.
We're big fans, big supporters, big collaborators.
Yes.
I just see so much of of what, like everybody's like dying. Well, what about post-COVID? What do we do? Well, these are one of these things you can do. You can support the Hunger Project. You can get involved in learning how to do hyper-local community development.
Right.
Suzanne's out there, Hunger Project's out there. And is there any way yet to get a hold of information on the community-led development work that you guys are doing? Is that to be coming soon?
There's a website for the movement for community-led development. So people who are involved in development can get information about the global organization and the national chapters in each country that do the government advocacy by collaborating together. There are several working groups of the movement, and we're in the process of getting connected into the movement for community-led development. We do have a website also for the work that I'm doing towards developing these workshops.
So and I want to kind of broaden this out now. I know in the Hunger Project, and certainly in the conversation for community-led development, it has two parts. It's not just grassroots on the ground, hyper-local advocacy. It's also governmental advocacy. Can you tell us a little bit about that part as well?
Yes, absolutely. Well, as part of the movement for community-led development that was started in 2015, the Hunger Project is a secretariat for that movement. But there are also national chapters. There are a dozen or more national chapters around the world. And in these national chapters, that's where the actual advocacy work gets done for that government. So it isn't someone in New York or DC advocating to Malawi how they should shift their policies. Not at all. It's the Hunger Project Malawi, Heifer Project, and many other of our partners in the movement collaborating together, and local NGOs as well, collaborating together to go with one voice, a shared vision, a shared agenda, and one voice to government officials. So in that way, there's of course, a stronger set of people and voice to listen to, but it also has that local/national, local feel of what's needed in their country.
Yeah, great. And that's a model we really, really support, like great governance at the larger umbrella level, whether that be state or nation level or global level, to protect, human rights and the commons of the planet, paired with this hyper-local solution making. To me, that's the model, and and the more we can prove that out and see. Now, right now, you're advocating on behalf of. I think I'd rather see you guys actually be the governing bodies. But
well, thanks. But there's some good results. I mean, one story in Benin, for example, that national chapter was successful in having the national government come and attend, actually believe it was at the Hunger Project office, attend a planning session to see how they might incorporate community-led development in their national plan. Wow. So, there are many examples of where interested government officials, whether it's a minister of sanitation or whatever is the minister who gets excited about that, then tends to want to bring in community-led development to their governmental programs. And that's crucial because government really has to take the responsibility for infrastructure as well. Healthcare, health, hospitals, healthcare, water systems, sanitation, education, schools, all those sorts of things that in many, many countries, nonprofits are currently filling that gap. Right. International nonprofits need to pull themselves out of that over time as governments step in and take responsibility, and as rural grassroots leaders can rise up with their voice and their plans to sort of meet government. So that's the plan, the grassroots level sort of leadership rising up. Yep. To be that vehicle that local governments can trust to take the resources and take the responsibility, as well as national governments, coming up to speed on what's theirs to provide.
Yeah, seems like a revolution going at the proper speed, without having to break something to have a revolution in model. It's right. slowly replacing the existing model with a better model. And I think we need a lot of examples of that, obviously, and maybe in a lot of domains. So if you can just help my audience out just a little bit, a lot of the people who are following boldly now are, they're younger or maybe they're at a point in their life where they've had a very traditional career, traditional path, and they're feeling a longing to do something more, to get involved or be in action. They're not really sure what that kind of bold thing is inside of them or what they want to. What are just some things that people can attend to? Like, how can they orient themselves to begin to know where they might actually play a role in some of these exciting things you're talking about?
Right. I'm so glad you asked that question. I actually have several friends who called to see if I would speak to their senior college student children to say, they've got a degree in women's studies or, whatever it is in, like, what do they do now? And how do they look at how to really, deploy themselves powerfully in the world today? So it's a great question. I think I trust our youth, first of all, to be very civic minded and interested in the bigger picture. I think some practical recommendations are really spend some time looking to see what's your vision for your life, because whatever you do next for a job or however you deploy yourself, whatever you do next is a stepping stone to that. But having the vision for your life is a way to measure up to that, to measure, is this next thing I'm going to take on doing that? The Hunger Project has its vision, commitment, and action workshop, also working on a version that citizens could take on and do for themselves. I'm going to try it out with some of these, friends of mine, and make that available much more broadly. There are a group of people, if they're college students, I'd say if they have and they're in the US, if they have a chapter of Feel Good in their universities, even during this virtual time, those folks are helping students become and learn how to be a good global citizen and how to give back. So I'd say first look to what you think the vision for your life is, and look at the opportunities of what's missing out there. Magic question in the Hunger Project is always, after visioning, is ask the question, what's missing? Mm-hmm. What's missing that, if provided, would leverage and catalyze movement to that vision? So get clear early in life what your life's about. And if you're not sure, take on a world where every woman, man, and child leads a healthy and fulfilling life of self-reliance and dignity. Try that one for a while.
Yeah, that's a good one to be in service to for all of them. Okay, so I want to say, hey, if there's any way that Boldly Now, in the next 3 to 6 months could do one of those as an online experience for the people in our community that are interested, I would love to find a way to support that. Let's try it out. I mean, we have a lot of people right now that two things are happening. One is either they're emerging into their adult life in a time when there's no jobs.
Yes.
Or they're in a period of life, they've either lost a job, or the job that they had is no longer a match for who they are inside. And I want to make sure that we can get as many resources to people to be able to have that luxury, really, to have the self-examination.
Yes.
To try to figure out what their purpose and their vision is, and then figure out where in the world that might align. I mean,
yes.
In this time, I think like people are bored, and I promise you, the world is not going to get transformed by doing more binge watching.
Exactly.
And I'm not saying binge watching is bad. Everybody can do a little bit of that occasionally, but at a certain point, it's like, well, what is mine to do? Really, what is mine to do out there? And I think our job as organizations that are supporting that is to help answer that. Well, it could be A, it could be C, it could be, here's a bunch of options, so that they don't feel like they're in a desert of opportunity to make a difference and a contribution. So we'll partner with you guys to figure if we can get one of those going, an online digital version of that.
Thank you for that.
And just like now back to you. I know you've just completed being the global CEO of the Hunger Project. That's been in the past few months. Is that right?
It is. Yes, it's became a much more sort of chaotic transition for me than I originally intended, given that COVID sort of hit and all travel and everything sort of came to a sudden halt. But it's also very fortuitous to give it time to be reflective and see of all the things in the Hunger Project that really I'm excited about. What's mine to contribute to now?
Yeah.
And so that really led me to what we've just been talking about.
Yeah, and I'm excited about the work you're doing in the community-led development. I'm excited to see what happens with kind of the new evolution of the leadership work you're doing. And we'll be really excited to have you back on the show in about 2 or 3 months to get an update on all that, and hear a little bit more. And I think one of the things that's important, I think, for people to remember is that it's not like you achieve some level of personal development or consciousness in your life and then, wow, you're set. You can just kind of cruise on. That we have to keep growing and developing, and that goes on for as long as we're breathing. We still have that. And so I think it's great. Just thank you for being a demonstration of that and seeing the evolution of your life and your work. And, just know that me personally, I'm a huge fan. what you're doing is an exemplary of what we're saying to the world is possible through the Boldly Now platform. This is a possible way to live your life and
Yes.
make contributions and
Thank
have a
you.
great life. And you know, so yeah, thank you.
Yes.
And anything else left for you before we sign off today?
I would just sign off by saying be visions focused and mobilize communities for self-reliant action and be courageous.
Thank you, Suzanne.
You bet. Thanks, Michael, Shaun.